So one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problems of the chiropractic profession relative to personal injury, is they give terrible notes and high bills. Well, what's the definition of terrible notes and high bills? Well, I can give you a checklist of documentation, whether it's being done or not. That's an easy way to show whether or not you're getting the documentation. But then how does that compare to a high bill? Well, a high bill is relative. What determines a high bill is relative to the value. It's no different than you go out and buying a car and you spending X amount of money. What kind of value are you getting for the money you're spending? So when you have a high bill, how do you determine value? Well, what kind of offer are you getting? That documentation is getting what kind of offer. That's what creates value in personal injury case is the offer. And almost always the offer is 2-to-1 or less medicals. And that's bad. And it should be as a minimum 3-to-1, meaning if your bill was $5,000, then you should at least be getting an offer of $15,000 relative to the medicals. Now, remember, there's 4 major potential injury awards. It's not it's not just medicals. So you got the medicals, you got the impairment injury award, that's potential. You got the pain and suffering injury award potential, and you got the prognosis and need for future care injury award potential. Now, all of those are a direct result of the doctor's documentation. Unfortunately, what's happening, and it's been happening for quite some time, ever since I've been in practice, it's been like this. Doctors give terrible documentation. So what does terrible documentation have to do with the bill? Well, they get 2-to-1 of an injury award relative to their documentation. So there's nothing wrong with a $10,000 bill, a $50,000 bill, a $100,000 bill, but there's everything wrong with it if you're not at least getting 3-to-1 relative to medicals. So if your bill's $50,000, as a rule, you should be getting an insurance offer or claim for $150,000. And that's why I say you should always get a 3-to-1. You should always have good documentation that gets a 3-to-1 medicals, even if there's no permanent problems with the patient. Let me give you an example. Let's say the patient is like 16 years old. They've never had any pre-existing injuries. They get in an accident. They have no permanent problems. Well, guess what kind of bill that patient's going to typically get in a chiropractor's office? The same bill, the same $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 bill that an older person would get who had complicating factors and a permanent impairment. Well, that's just crap. We know what's going on there. The chiropractor is just sucking as much of the insurance money out as he can. So it depends on the state. So if you got a state where there's 10,000, you'll find almost every chiropractic bill, totally independent of the injury, goes up to $10,000. You'll find that if a state has a $3,000 cap, you'll find every case goes to $3,000. So it's not relative to the injury. It's not relative to the documentation. It's relative to how much money they can get. That's the reality of what's going on in the chiropractic profession. And the medical people know this. That's like the attorneys know this. That's like the attorney I just spoke with last week. Within 3 minutes of introducing myself, she said, yeah, we don't like dealing with chiropractors because they have high bills and bad documentation. That's the industry standard. 75% of the attorneys do not even work with chiropractors, really for 2 reasons. Number one is they're confused like the market at large. The same reason 92% of the population does not go to chiropractors but also they know that if they do, they got a big bill, they got a huge bill with very little offer. In other words, the chiropractor creates a problem for him. And now he's got to ask him to cut his bill to make anything work out to where he makes some money and the patient makes some money. So it's a big problem. And that's the norm in chiropractic. Now, I always see problems as good, as good. To me, that's called opportunity. So when I go into the attorney and I show them my documentation, it pales in comparison to what they're getting. Matter of fact, when I do forensic case analysis, out of the 10 major categories of documentation, typically 7 out of 10 aren't even being done by the doctor, not even being done. And when I go through my total checklist, only 57% of the total checklist was actually even performed. And I'm talking about documentation that should have been performed on a typical low impact soft tissue spinal injury. That's how bad it is. It's unbelievably bad. Well, that's the good news when you actually convert them and you give the educational sales presentation. That's the great news about it. And then that documentation, you'll find, will pretty much always give a 3-to-1 injury award. That's what it'll do. That's the definition of a high bill, bad documentation, or a high bill. Your bill's not high unless you're not getting a 3-to-1 injury award. If it's less than 3-to-1, and most of them are 2-to-1 or less now, there's a lot of doctors that'll have a $7,000 bill and the insurance company might offer $9,000. That's a terrible situation. It could be both. It could be his bill's too big and the documentation too bad. But bottom line is, whatever the bill is, it should be supporting a 3-to-1. So it's not the amount of your bill, it's the documentation. Are you supporting a 3-to-1 injury award relative to medicals? If you're not, I hate to say it, but you're kind of the problem. You're why the attorneys don't like dealing with you. And there's no reason for them to deal with you. If your documentation is given 2-to-1, there's no reason for them to deal with it.